Occult news. Alternative news channel Law of the Sea, how people were made slaves. Occult wars, secrets of history, person. By admin, May the 29th, 2019, 10:41 a.m. Sestchayokvai. Law of the Sea. Everyone is born free and equal in dignity and rights. No constitution grants them to us, but only lists them. No one has the right to dominate or rule over others, capture more creations than another, or possess any part of the world. Everything is given equally to everyone. In September 1802, Alexander I approved the Ministry of Justice of the Russian Empire with his manifesto on the establishment of ministries, thereby tying the Russian Empire to the banking obligations of the Commercial Code. To obtain a banking license to open the Imperial Russian Bank in 1847 as a Russian bank, to begin with, calculations were made in gold. As long as there was enough gold, bonds were used. Noblemen bought the title of nobility by obtaining a certificate from the Ministry of Justice at the expense of their property. Their wealth was movable and immovable property. Peasants were counted as poll subjects of the Tsar. As a result, the birth certificate of a child became a form of joining the contract of adhesion between a person and the Russian Empire. An adhesion contract is a bilateral agreement based on consent or disagreement, in which it is not possible to negotiate the terms of such a contract. As a result, all property passed to the treasury of the empire, including all souls as indirect property, as collateral for loans received from established banks. In Russia, since ancient times, population records were kept by the church in metric books, and a personal birth certificate was called an extract from the metric book or simply a metric. Looking ahead. After the revolution, the church was removed from the registration of births and deaths. The decree of the Council of People's Commissars on Freedom of Conscience, Church and Religious Societies of January the 23rd, 1918 prescribed the following: acts of civil status are carried out exclusively by civil authorities, the departments of registration of marriages of birth. No ecclesiastical or religious society has the right to own property. They do not have the rights of a legal entity. For the first time, keeping registers of births was fixed in the second half of the 17th century. In 1666, the king passed the Life Law Subjects Act Sestchayok. Roman Law of the Canon. 3.3 Right of suspension and corruption. Article 100-Sestchayok Trust. Laws in ancient times were oral, they were not written down, and writing meant violation of God's laws, violation of the initiation code and the ability to lie. The laws of the Roman cult were written for the Roman cult, for the enslavement of subordinates. The canons were appropriated by the Roman cult for the sake of the glory of the empire. All laws must initially be oral. Relations in ancient society were regulated by the principles of con, from where the words canon, from time immemorial, custom, came to us. Guided by the principles of the horse, the living, individuals avoided mistakes and could incarnate again and again in this life. The principle is always above the law, because it contains more possibilities than the law, just as a sentence contains more information than one word. The very word law means beyond the horse. If a society lives according to the principles of the horse, and not according to the laws, it is more vital and lively. Commandments contain more than a con, and therefore surpass it, just as a story contains more than a sentence. Canon 2036 of Sestchayok Trust, also known by several other pseudonyms such as Lifetime or Years or Portavai or 5E3 Trust, Foreign Citrus Trust or Secret Trust, is a pseudo-form of trust first formed in 16th century under Henry VIII in England on one or more assumptions, including one or more persons who were considered to be wards, babies, idiots, lost or thrown into the sea, and, therefore, presumed dead after 7 years. Canon 2037 in terms of the evidence-based history of the formation of the Sestchayok Trusts. The first Sestchayok Trusts were formed under the Act of Henry VIII in England in 1540, and were later completely corrupt, leaving the poor people of England, after all their homes, goods and property captured in 1535 under the cover of small religious estates worth less than £200. Social security or fellowship was granted in the form of a cestula, cus, or simply a manor in which to live, work and to bequeath by written will, as well as in 1666 Westminster and the ruling classes passed the infamous Proof of Life Act, also called the Cestula-Yorkvi Act, under which the poor who did not prove to Westminster, the king and or the court that they were alive, were henceforth declared dead by law and deprived of civil rights, and therefore their property. This extremely morally abhorrent act, which remains in force today, is where the infamous occult rituals of British courts with the wearing of black clothes and other paraphernalia in honour of the dead arose, as well as in 1707, Westminster, under the leadership of Queen Anne, expanded the provisions of Proof of Life and Cestula-Yorkvi, expanding the use of such structures eventually for corporate and other franchise purposes. This evil, defiled and utterly blasphemous act, directly contrary to all forms of Christian morality and the rule of law, remains the cornerstone of global banking and financial control in the 21st century, as well as in 1796, for the first time in the states of Portugal, the duty of King George III was applied 36 GEO.3, C.5220, as well as in 1837, 1 Vict. C.26, and an amendment to the nature of wills that if the person under the property of Portugal did not exercise proper will, then such property would be made available to the executors and administrators. Canon 2047 in 1931, the Roman cult, also known as the Vatican, created the Bank for International Settlements to oversee the claimed property of associated private central banks around the world. After the deliberate bankruptcy of most countries, private central banks were installed as administrators, and the global Cestula-Yorkvi foreign sitters trust system was introduced in 1933. Canon 2050 since 1933, when a child is born, executives or administrators of the upper class knowingly and willingly claim the child as movable property on the estate. The slavery contract is then created, following an ancient tradition. Ink prints of the child's feet are recorded on the birth record or a drop of his blood, and also deceive the parents into signing the child through a trickster. This live birth record as a bill of exchange is converted into a slave bond sold to a private reserve bank and then transferred to a second and separate Cestula trust for a child owned by the bank. Canon 2051 each Cestula-Yorkvi trust, established since 1933, is one of 3 crowns representing 3 claims to Roman cult property representing real property, personal property and church property, and nil of any rights to men and women except those who are chosen as loyal members of the community, as well as executors and administrators. A birth certificate issued under Roman law is the modern equivalent of a 17th century settlement certificate and means that the owner is a beggar and essentially a Roman slave. A birth certificate is not directly related to private secret trusts controlled by a private banking network, and cannot be used to force the administration of a state or nation to disclose the existence of these secret trusts. Canon 2055 While the private secret trusts of private central banks cannot be viewed directly, they are still formed on the basis of certain presumptions of law, including claimed ownership of the name, body, mind, and soul of infants, men and women. Every man and woman has the absolute right to reproach and reject such false assumptions as a member of the one heaven and the owner of his own title. Total in 1666, the Cestula-York law was passed by the King of England, according to which all who do not declare themselves as a living person to the king or in court were declared dead to the state system. Their property was considered abandoned and transferred into permanent or temporary possession of a trust, since only a legal entity has the right to obtain the property of a person or an individual. But only the beneficiary has the unconditional right to own and dispose of the property, while the natural person only acquires the ownership of the property. With the introduction of jurisdiction, the born humans began to assign legal names, issuing act records on the assignment of full names. Man from natural law passed into commercial law, into the ownership of corporations, companies, acquired the status of an individual dead in law. Indirect property can be pledged to other companies in exchange for benefits, in growth at interest. With an increase in the body weight of a person, its collateral value increases. A birth certificate is a form of adhesion agreement, a trust warehouse receipt, translated as a debt. The birth certificate of the name of the surname and patronymic in the registry office is an accession to the Unified Commercial Code and the creation of a full name company. Birth certificate control. When you are born, your parents create an estate on your behalf and sign the title to the state so that it can manage your property through your birth certificate. And the newborn is appointed manager of the created name and the established company. This property or legal entity, the company, is given a name. For example, Ivanov Ivan Ivanovich, a corporatized version of your legal entity that is used in all legal matters throughout life, such as applications for work and loans, credit cards, passport, driver's license, and etc. Various laws concerning the rules of births, deaths, and marriages are combined with the Birth, Death and Marriage Registration Act of 1899. This was done in accordance with federal and state civil procedure rules. The compulsory civil registration and the appointment of you as a corporate manager began in 1856. All acts of birth, death, and marriage for 1899 were edited and published in 1934 and 1935 in newspapers. Since 1933, all U.S. laws have been in place to pay off the U.S. government debt to the Federal Reserve, international banks, and other U.S. creditors, and they want you to agree to be responsible for that debt. We do not live in a world where society is governed by trust and the rule of law. Instead, all people, all over the world, are secretly declared by the state to be insane, incompetent, and spiritually dead, unable to manage their lives or their affairs with trust and honor. These claims take place in secret, using the hidden side of the legal and financial system. A consequence of the erroneous presumption of personal incompetence is the model of debt slavery that is used throughout the world today. Debt is a literal and legal reality that is hidden from us, based on debt and loans. The value held in this credit-based system is managed in trust for our benefit. The trade title for the registration of the name belongs to the state. The birth certificate is prima facie proof that the state is the holder of the title in the name, and all benefits derived from it are fruits. There is a kind of property that the holder of interest or the usufructor has. Opposite to your development, the state should create a different structure, such as utilities, financial institutions, the educational system, and so on. All of this is developed and given in trust to good for you, with a commitment to abide by their laws and the legal policies of this society. Instead of truly educating us, developing our ability to create value, they drown us through the education system, which makes us literally mentally incompetent, not to mention weapons of mass destruction. Common law is a legal system created in the 16th and 17th centuries to govern citizens who were declared insane and incompetent, also called wards. An admiralty law was later created to govern the estates of these lost souls. And the Uniform Commercial Code is the latest and greatest version of the share-based system. Sovereign men and women maintain the individual common law identity known as the law of the earth, freeing them from the power of government institutions. The law of the land is a natural law in the country in which the people live. There are also other rules of law and jurisdiction that no one told us about, but they are applied in relation to us, namely, natural law, common law, contract law, admiralty law, canon law, commercial law, and these are all different jurisdictions. Each jurisdiction has its own color and spelling of the name of the trading company. For example, a bank account with the royal status. When opening an account with a Swiss bank, fingerprint is required. The spiritual side today, the most important offer in the world, is the papal bull, an official document issued by the Roman cult by the pontiff for the main act of the law, the curse or claims to the cult's power over its declared dominance in the world, all peoples, all people, all rights, and all religions. Not a single document has a life, and the papal bull, being a satanic curse and having a connection, uses the flesh of innocent people, creates traps of their souls in paper form, writing out birth certificates. Thus, the newborn is registered and not born, the soul is in a paper prison. According to the law of the sea, men and women are considered as dead things, cargo that does not have a soul. In maternity hospitals, fortune contracts have now been turned into a ritual to attach a negative entity. The fortune contract, or a deal with the devil through blood circles at the screening of a newborn, is a connection and a deal between the man and the demon, while the latter offers special services and fulfills the wish of the man, is rewarded by the soul of the man after the contract is completed. An invitation to a demon into your life establishes a contract and gives him the legal right to be there. Thus, the creation of a paper man body is proof of witchcraft, sorcery and necromancy. A birth certificate is a Roman cult certificate of ownership of the soul of living subjects. The church ledger is now used all over the world. A birth certificate is a blood connection and signs over a man to the state. The baby's blood is taken at birth and mapped to Guthrie. It is stored and means ownership of the person through bloodline. These are all ancient black magic, death rites. Birth in hospital. The Admiralty system implies that when the child was born, he was already drowned in the womb, and when the medical staff appeared, they simply rescued and pulled out of the mother's waters an unidentified body, a dead child. According to WHO guidelines, no one was recorded as dead because there was no proof that he was alive. We are registered from birth as patients with mental disabilities and in need of care. The disease is eternal wakefulness, a vegetative state of mind. Persistent vegetative state is a disorder of consciousness in which patients with severe brain damage are in a state of partial arousal rather than true awareness. Hanging wake syndrome. By signing any documentation in the hospital, the mother de facto gives her consent to the processing of personal data of the unborn fetus. A live-born child is alive from the moment of separation from the mother's body through childbirth and, if there are signs of live birth, until it is entered into the civil registry. A medical birth certificate is certified and a reserve account is created, thereby creating a trust to open an account. Later an invoice is issued, which we already know as a birth certificate of the registry office, and the warehouse receipt for the goods one remains in the department office work in the registry office. In the medical institution, an entry remains in the register of the state statistical accounting on the birth of a child alive, a completed Form 103U. Of the two parts of the confirmation of a live-born child, the first remains in the medical facility. The second part is provided to the registry office to change the record on live births to create a trust and a name person. After the recording, the body is joined as collateral to the Unified Commercial Code. The mother joins the Shepherd-Towner Act, confirming the child's absence of a father by indicating her maiden name. Against the mother, the Vatican registers criminal perjury proceedings for the registrar. When creating a trust account, the mother shifts the social, educational responsibility for the child to the state, providing him with the possibility of custody and a trustee. Creation of insurance creates a trust account, trust. The mother, as a beneficiary, receiving insurance, sells the property to a trusted person, having received a one-time allowance, which assumes overhead obligations for overhead costs. In this case, the trustee is obliged to act in the interests of the beneficiary, the mother, by the presence of proof receipts. The trustee must have documentary evidence of the expenses. The information included in the form indicates that the soul is floating, and therefore is not real, or that a person is caught in a trap, that is, enslaved. It so happened that the soul was trapped, or imprisoned, inscribed. Such a child is considered to be thrown into a sea of dead souls, drowned in water. The law of the Admiralty, a child is a boat without a soul. Bastard, or as they said in the old days, the illegitimate. They have no homeland, no land of their own. When the baby is born, the hospital sends the original, not a copy, of the live birth record to the State Bureau of Statistics. A government-issued birth certificate is then registered with the U.S. Department of Commerce. Registering a child is a legal matter, and it is perjury for a false name or incorrect information for the registrar. Marriage registry. What crime do you say when giving birth to a child? The crime lies in the fact that, going to the registrar of the registry office, the informant parents in the application are asked to assign a full name, that is, in fact, to create a trade corporation, a business name. Based on the unification of birth and deaths into a single production, The birth document actually became a death document, and the day of birth date of death of the body is written. The series of numbers on the document is the security number on the world exchange. Why? Because you are a monetary equivalent in international banks. State, firm since 1933, all laws in the United States have been in place to pay off the U.S. government debt to the Federal Reserve, international banks, and other U.S. creditors, and they want you to agree to be responsible for that debt. Various laws concerning the rules of births, deaths and marriages are combined with the Marriage Act 1899 and the Birth, Death and Marriage Registration Act 1899. This was done in accordance with federal and state civil procedure rules. Compulsory civil registration began in 1856. All acts of birth, death and marriage for 1899 were edited and published in 1934 and 1935. Civil status part-time is a corporation company USA.
When you were born, you essentially went to work for company. The company you worked for could not repay the loans they had with the bank, and the company had to go bankrupt in 1933, so they had no way of paying you. Besides, the company came to your parents and asked to borrow your assets, and your parents unwittingly pledged. This created a so-called someone else's account. The bankers gave the company a loan for your application for the amount that the U.S. company owes the bankers, which at the time of your birth was worth about $1 million. Then the bankers took your application and used fractional bank lending. The birth certificate is proof that the application has been sent. This application is a real negotiable instrument, and the birth certificate proves the existence of a negotiable instrument used in trade to borrow money. Because it was promised to you, you became involved in what is called forced bondage. Total, the Vatican has created a worldwide trust using the birth certificate to absorb, capture the value of the future productive energy of every living subject. Every state, province and country in the monetary system contributes to this worldwide trust identified as insurance numbers, social numbers TIN, SS, SIN or IN as an example, stored in the Vatican Registry, Inward Clearing Bill. The Vatican owns a controlling stake in all insurance companies, corporations around the world. Living subjects became corporate fictions for their birth certificates. A link to the Vatican through law, Vatican from crown to temple bar through laws to condemn living souls, and because of money, Vatican's ancestral value IMF, in the Treasury, Federal Reserve System, through banks of living subjects, loans, through judges, administration, and sheriff's confiscation. At the maternity hospital, a medical birth certificate is issued for each birth, which is a bill of exchange and is also sold as a bond to a private trust or registry bank. In the event that the dead declares himself a beneficiary, then the trust bank, in accordance with the law of the sea, is obliged to return the lost property in the form of a foreign exchange payment, which does not contradict the cess to EQ by trust reference to Canon 2050. The Treasury creates an account for each citizen at birth, after which a bail is established through citizenship and trust, through the Charter, Constitution, to the chief person president, since he takes the oath of managing the property for you. The government can only regulate what it creates, for example, a fiction, a legal entity, individual, but it did not create a living breath. Therefore, when a man or woman was born, they created a face or person, a man or a citizen. What for? Because the land and subsoil belong to the people. And now that's all. You have given your trust means power, and others like them are being controlled. Then they changed the monetary system. They seized gold, and the country has no money. It is possible to take out a loan only from other states, because the agreement on the issue with the central bank. So they issued a full name, that in capital letters, incorporation, foreign state. They lend themselves on our behalf through the issuance of loans for this full name in the created electronic account boxes, a bank account. The whole country is in credits. They moved us to live on a computer. Exit any holder of a fictitious business name, person, upon learning who she is legally related to a U.S. corporate entity. May apply to the UCC listing funding security agreement registering his/her interest in an artificial person. USA created when his mother applied for a birth certificate, the act of registering the biological properties of the mother, her newly born child, substance. With the help of the relevant state authorities, places them in the US fee and holds the name of the paper form, not the substance, child. But the deed of registration of ownership of transfers from the mother to the corporate party, the US, and its legal right dictate how this child can be raised, cared for, and educated. This substance has been replaced by the public national credit system, where debt is legal tender, so-called money. Accordingly, the United States, as the owner of the title of artificial object straw man, person, in essence, using human as collateral, gold to obtain a loan, sells through the warehouse receipt mechanism the potential productivity of the individual's lifetime, you, and represents you. You can regain control by simply filing a bail notice against your birth certificate. By contacting the Secretary of State or the Department of Commerce and applying for UCC-1 funding, listing the property as collateral in the application. The same can be done with the birth certificate, which is your property. You and only you can file this bond notice. You and only you can determine the value of the property. Since you are invaluable in the eyes of God, the value of your UCC-1 should be unlimited. Your debt is actually prepaid with a so-called cash account. There is no real substance or money of exchange, like gold and silver, only accounting adjustments and offset. By creating a bond and mailing it with a duly filed UCC-1 copy to the Secretary of the Treasury, you can access the prepaid account that was created with your birth certificate and begin paying off any debt incurred from that point forward.